Hello and thank you for joining us for the KREM 2 News Week in Review. I'm Cody Proctor. Each weekend, we walk you through the headlines from the past week in the Inland Northwest. Let's get started with one of the biggest news stories of the past few days.
There hasn't been a day since that we haven't been thinking about and working on this case.
November 13th, 2022. A tragic day, Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson says still feels overwhelming years later.
I think anyone who doesn't feel some emotions in this case has something wrong with them.
A case that's now over after an Ada County judge sentenced Brian Kohberger to life in prison on Wednesday for killing 4 University of Idaho students.
He didn't just take them from the world. He took them from me, my friends, my people who felt like my home.
All the victims, all the families, these are good people. They're suffering and they're going through so much pain. And we hope ultimately that the resolution here will provide some support on the road to healing.
Special prosecuting attorney Josh Hurwitz says the plea deal negotiated by both legal teams was the best possible outcome.
It provides finality. It prevents re-traumatization.
Some of the victims' loved ones disagree. Kaylee Gonzalez's brother, Stephen, put Thompson's record on blast after the sentencing.
There is a clear and troubling pattern. Families are left feeling unheard. Justice is negotiated down through plea deals, and the public is left with unanswered questions.
Thompson pushed back on those claims.
Every case stands on its own merits. And every case that my office has handled since I took office 33 years ago has been decided based on what is unique to that case. I understand and I respect the feelings of some of the families or the family members who don't agree with our decision. I honestly do. But there are also others who feel like they have received some comfort and some closure from this. And in the end, it has to be the prosecutor's decision.
Well, this prison here outside of Boise, about 20 minutes outside of the city, is where Kohberger is beginning to serve out that life sentence. But it appears that a motive in this case may be going into solitary confinement with him forever. He has never offered any remorse, nothing in court yesterday, any emotion or any details about why he did what he did. But we are starting to get new details emerging from police and prosecutors now that the gag order has been lifted. In a press conference right after the sentencing yesterday, those investigators discussed what they found over the course of the last few years. State Patrol calls this one of the most extensive investigations in Idaho history. They confirmed they never found any social media connection between Kohberger and the victims, nothing on the internet. And the lead prosecutor tells us there was no evidence to indicate Kohberger was any kind of serial killer in waiting. They confirm, yes, that knife sheath left at the scene was the crucial evidence, but they exhausted all resources looking for that knife.
It wasn't a lack of trying. Everywhere that we had evidence of where he went, based upon phone records, based upon the evidence that we had gathered, we searched that. We went there.
And we have finality and conclusion, not just for the families, but for everyone who suffered because of this.
And we are expecting more details to be released in the days and weeks to come as police and prosecutors put more documents out there now that the gag order has been lifted. Steve Gonzalez, Kaylee Gonzalez's father, yesterday indicated to us that the crime scene at 1122 King Street may have been more brutal than we first thought. That's also evidence we're expected to learn about in the days and weeks ahead.
Now that the Kohberger criminal case is over and the gag order lifted, authorities are releasing documents. One is an interesting look at Kohberger's life behind bars, with one inmate calling him a weirdo, another calling him annoying. Police interviewed the inmate at the Latah County Jail in the cell next to Kohberger's. He called him intelligent and polite for the most part, but Kohberger quickly became annoying because of some of his habits. He would wash his hands dozens of times a day and would spend 45 minutes to an hour in the shower. Kohberger would be awake almost all night and nap during the day. Detectives asked the inmate if Kohberger ever lost his temper. The inmate was watching sports one time and said, "You suck," to one of the players on the team. Kohberger immediately got up and put his face to the bars and aggressively asked if the inmate was talking about him or his mother. Did the murder suspect ever mention anything about the crimes, detectives asked? The man said Kohberger did not mention his alleged offenses at all. A second batch of documents was released later in the day. They described the savage nature of some of Kohberger's crimes, including one victim who was stabbed in the face several times. This is the beginning of what we expect to be thousands of pages of documents released by authorities in Idaho. I'm Chris Ingles in the King 5 newsroom.
As we go to break, here's a check of your weekend forecast. Welcome back to the KREM 2 News Week in Review. Before we get back to this week's headlines, we want to remind you, you can get the latest news and weather forecast anytime you want on KREM 2 Plus. It's our streaming app you can watch on your TV, and best of all, it's free. We hope you'll check it out, but now let's get back to the Week in Review.
Law enforcement right now, there's an active shooter zone. There's not PT3's down, PT1's down. Everybody shot up here.
New details are released on the deceased suspect Wes Rowley from the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office 3 weeks after the deadly incident on Canfield Mountain, which killed 2 North Idaho Battalion Chiefs, Frank Harwood and John Morrison, and injured a third firefighter, Dave Tisdall.
This was a premeditated ambush, a pure act of evil against the people we look to for help.
Sheriff Norris says before the attack, suspect Wes Rowley had in his possession sketches and drawings depicting on what was going to happen at Canfield Mountain.
He's got kill, kill, kill. He's got what appears to be a shotgun here.
Another sketch Sheriff Norris interprets is a drawing of Wes Rowley holding a gun to his head.
Pump shotgun, butt on the ground, the barrel here, and he pulls the trigger.
But that's not all. A handwritten letter was found in Rowley's truck. The message addressed to his father, and it reads like a final goodbye.
Hello, Father. I write this to you in a concerned effort that you may read this in utmost sincerity. Tomorrow I shall go into battle. If I survive it, would be with utmost dishonor.
Sheriff Norris says Rowley's drawings and social media are still being reviewed, but they leave an eerie feeling behind. This is still a developing story, and as we learn more details, we will be sure to update our information. I'm reporting here in Hayden, Regan Gallo, KREM 2 News.
It's been almost 3 years since police lights flashed in the area of Wabash and Haven and Hilliard. Almost 3 years since Spokane police shot and killed Robert Bradley. We spoke with his fiance in the days that followed.
Digging through there looking for something, and he sits up, hands empty. Before he even has time to put his hands up, he's dodging bullets.
Now the City of Spokane's set to pay nearly $3.7 million to his family to settle a wrongful death lawsuit. Body cam video shows officers approaching Bradley, who is near his vehicle, shouting at him to show his hands. The officers claim they shot Bradley because they thought he was reaching for a weapon, but investigators say Bradley never fired any shots. After an independent investigation, the Spokane County prosecutor found the shooting was justified, meaning officers wouldn't face criminal charges. But according to city spokesperson Aaron Hutt, this lawsuit's a civil matter.
The reason there is a settlement in place is because there was a determination by a civil jury in federal court, and it was our insurance company that settled that case.
Of the nearly $3.7 million, Hutt says the city would pay $1.5 million, with insurance covering the rest. The majority of the city's portion would go to attorney's fees, and the previous settlement with Bradley's fiance, it would be paid for by the city's risk fund. The attorney representing Bradley's family told KREM 2 she won't comment until the settlement's finalized, but did share Bradley's children miss him every day. The Spokane City Council is scheduled to vote on the settlement's approval next Monday. If approved, the settlement will be the second largest in Spokane's history. In Spokane, Cody Proctor, KREM 2 News.
House Speaker Mike Johnson is facing backlash over social media after sending lawmakers home early amid Epstein file votes, pushes from both sides of the aisle. Now, some are saying it was to avoid voting about it altogether. On his first day back from the Capitol, Congressman Baumgartner sat down to speak about his thoughts on the files. Where do you stand on releasing more information and being just transparent about this case as a whole?
Well, there's still a lot of questions about Epstein, a lot of interest in the public. So I think the best thing to do is try to get as much of the information out as possible. So I do support releasing any and all files that there are on Epstein. I think all that process is underway, with the Department of Justice. It's not that, Congress doesn't have the files. There's a lot of dispute about are there any? I mean, there are files, but what's in the files? We've all read those that are following the case. People like his former attorney Alan Dershowitz saying that there's not a lot in there, but there's a lot of public interest, and what we just want to do is be as transparent as possible. So what is there that can be released in a way that doesn't re-traumatize those victims and works under the law, that should happen, and then I think the country can move forward.
Congressman Baumgartner, many critics actually say that House Speaker Mike Johnson actually, rushed into this summer break for you guys, specifically to avoid voting on these Epstein files. What do you think about that? Yeah, I don't think that's accurate at all. I think that's just coming from some fake news and Democrats that are trying to play politics. I'm here today because we got out one day early for our summer recess, and so I think that's a little much ado about nothing and just kind of politics as usual. KREM 2 also reached out to Congressman Dan Newhouse about the files, and he agreed with Baumgartner's sentiment, saying in part, "I support the Department of Justice releasing the documents as long as the privacy of the victims is completely protected. If nothing has been released by the time Congress returns from recess, then we should discuss further action." During the interview, Congressman Baumgartner talked about some of the bills he helped vote for, like approving the Trump administration's request to cut over $9 billion for foreign aid and the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, despite its track record in educational programming for rural areas across the country like Spokane.
Well, we need to look at all areas that we can to save on funding. And, I like PBS and public broadcasting. We watch a little Doc Martin and a little Masterpiece Theater, a little Dora the Explorer in the morning with the kids and Curious George. But the reality is a very small percentage of the funding for those stations comes from the federal taxpayers, and we have to look at areas where we can save. So we got to make sure that dollars are available for education programmings and places that there are most needed. So it's not really a question of does it have value or not. The question is it a priority or not for what we have to fund across the country? And so I think public television in a year from now will still be there, and I think it'll do fine, and we'll focus on other areas of important spending.
The House and Senate are scheduled to return to the Capitol after Labor Day. In the newsroom, Christian Garza, KREM 2 News.
Thanks for joining KREM 2 News this weekend. I'm Cody Proctor. Right now, we're taking a look back at some of the news stories from the past week.
A 3-page training bulletin from Spokane Police Chief Kevin Hall establishes guidelines for how city officers will respond to calls about immigration enforcement. With ICE agents concealing their identities behind masks and generic police gear, the memo states, it's become increasingly more likely these arrests could be misconstrued as abductions, or that criminals could pose as federal agents. Hall adds there's potential for these situations to turn dangerous, with local and federal enforcement and even community members armed. Uniformed SPD officers will create legitimacy and hopefully bring calmness and order, he writes. The bulletin outlines how officers will respond to anything reported as potentially criminal or suspicious, but are not responding to perceived or reported immigration concerns. SPD officers are now being trained to ask for a federal agent's supervisor and request credentials. In legitimate ICE arrests, SPD is strictly limited to maintaining public and officer safety and de-escalation with no interference. State law prevents local law enforcement from aiding federal immigration enforcement, except in some circumstances where a judge has signed a warrant. Officers are also required to save all evidence, videos, and file reports on the situation, according to the memo. Despite a request for an interview, KREM 2 News was unable to speak with Chief Hall or SPD officials Thursday. Shannon Mowdy, KREM 2 News.
The Secretary of State's office says they do not have any evidence of undocumented residents voting in Washington elections recently, but the state's Republican Party wants to make it harder for unqualified voters to register. Democrats say that'll make it tougher for everyone.
Another summer, another petition to sign. This initiative would change a long-time Washington voter registration requirement.
This is an important step in establishing election integrity and restoring people's trust in our election process.
Washington Republican Party Chair and State Representative Jim Walsh is heading up the effort to require documented proof of citizenship for voters in Washington state.
All they do is they check a box saying, yes, I'm a legal voter.
Currently, to register, prospective voters check a box declaring they are a U.S. citizen. If enough signatures are gathered and the initiative passes, voters would have to provide an enhanced driver's license or a passport, birth certificate, or other proof of U.S. citizenship to vote.
If you ask the average person, where is your birth certificate right now in this moment, they might not know, and it might be a challenge to pull all of that together.
Democratic Party Chair Shasti Conrad calls the move unnecessary. She says the extra step would make it harder for qualified voters to register.
And I just think that we need to make voting as easy as possible for, U.S. citizens who are part of our democracy. We all should believe in wanting to continue to have a democracy.
It's a small burden, but our law requires that you be a citizen in order to vote. And it only follows that it would be logical to require some proof of citizenship.
If they gather enough signatures by the end of the year, next year's legislature would either need to pass the initiative as written, or they could let voters decide next November. And if the law were to change, every voter in the state of Washington would need to re-register with that documentation. In Olympia, Drew Mickelson, King 5 News.
Before we wrap up this edition of the KREM 2 News Week in Review, we have one more story you might have missed this past week.
Well, the area around Lake Spokane still has massive plumes of smoke like you can see behind me. Now, fire crews say they are making good progress when it comes to containing this wildfire, but they say evacuations will still have to stay in place for the time being. For nearly a week now, the skies above Stevens County have been filled with aircraft fighting the Lake Spokane fire from above, while more than 300 firefighters work to knock down flames on the ground. The Department of Natural Resources confirms the near 2,500-acre fire was human-caused.
It was really close, and I'm very upset with the people because it was human-started.
Albert Ensley has property 20 minutes south of Suncrest. He's among the dozens of people evacuated from their homes in areas near the Lake Spokane campground and up Rail Canyon and Happy Hill Road. Ensley says he's been evacuated since Sunday and lives out of his RV with his wife in 9 Mile Falls. They're parked in the Lakeside High School parking lot where an evacuation shelter's set up. While he's glad his loved ones are safe, he wants to leave.
It's extremely frustrating. They keep talking about the progress they're making, but when can I go home? That's what I want to know.
The answer? Not for at least 24 hours. Crews have lined the fire and are in the process of directing it towards State Route 291. First responders say this makes the fire easier and faster to put out, as crews are now closer to level ground. This, forecasted high winds and drier conditions, are keeping those evacuations in place for now.
We've got line around everything. It's looking good. There's still a lot of heat up there.
Terry Walter with the incident management team says fire crews are on the right track. In a community meeting at Lakeside High, he and others working the fire explained how crews are putting it out. As of Tuesday night, it's 16% contained. But Walter says as more progress is made, those evacuation orders will be lifted in the coming days. He says one structure's been destroyed in the fire, and they're hoping to keep any more from burning. As for Ensley, he hopes he can leave the school parking lot and assess his property that he hasn't seen in days.
I don't know how much of our property actually got scorched. I keep hearing we might be one of the lucky ones. We don't know until we get out there when it's all said and done.
Connor McAvoy, KREM 2 News.
Keep it here for more news and weather updates throughout the weekend. And don't forget, you can watch our latest newscasts anytime on your schedule on KREM 2 Plus. Download and watch right now for free. I'm Cody Proctor. Thank you for watching the KREM 2 News Week in Review.